Uh, uh. Good morning. Good morning.
Hello and good morning. Welcome to the Morning Deuce with Davis Spindle. How's everybody doing? Hope you've caught up with the earlier episodes this week. Yesterday I talked all about how my life and sports are coinciding, and I totally forgot to mention that Rob Gronkowski was like my favorite football player, obviously, was on the cover of Madden, and the song in the trailer was Little Dicky, who I've seen in concert and who signed a T-shirt that I have. I have photos with him, and then I randomly met him on Bourbon Street again, and he was so nice, and we hung out for like 15, 20 minutes and just talked. Guy's amazing. So, yeah, everything mostly other than Tom Brady being suspended for doing nothing wrong. Other than that, my life and sports are aligning pretty good right now. So all is well with the world. This episode is kind of the evolution of a bunch of things I've been talking about. They all have updates. I did a great episode, if I do say so myself, humbly, modestly, a great episode about how ridiculous it is that we're sending the Olympics to Brazil with the Zika virus when everyone knows Olympic Village is the most sexually active player on earth, and that Ryan Lochte alone is going to be responsible for the spread of that disease to the whole world. Obviously, it was a little tongue-in-cheek. I also did an episode about how humor expresses things you might not be willing to say straight up. I do think there's obviously some real problems with what's going on, the amount of spectators you're sending to a disease-ridden area carrying a mosquito-borne illness. And I'm not the only one, because now all these teams are coming out with outfits that are Zika-proof and have all these plans. Well, Australia doesn't want to be behind the ball, and our little update is that Australia has come out with a Zika-proof condom, which I guess is a condom that has some type of lubricant in it that has is treated with chemicals that make it, I guess, 99% effective against the spread of Zika. Now, I know what you're saying. If you're using a condom, you shouldn't be spreading it, and that's true, but it wouldn't hurt to have a little bit of extra juice up in there. I think that's what everyone's saying. So hopefully the Olympic Village, which uses 1 million condoms, can get some of those, because any little bit helps at this point. But the other thing is our government is working on the fight against Zika, but in typical government fashion, and this is where I'm going to get really upset, they are doing a horrible job at it. And by that, I mean they are so far apart. So if anyone remembers that crappy cartoon we all had to watch in elementary school about how a bill becomes a law, basically the House and Senate, one of them proposes a bill, it's got to get approved, voted on, and then go to the other house, approved and voted on there. But basically what has happened with our Congress, which is the least productive in the history of Congress, I believe. The 118th was, which I believe is this session. They're doing nothing because they are constantly in political bureaucratic fights, and everyone is just trying to make their funders and their party happy and not doing what they really think they should do. That being said, we are at this beautiful deadlock now where we have all this money to fight diseases that we allocated for Ebola, which we don't really need anymore, but it's locked up in this funding. And we can't continue the government at the rate we're doing it until we come up with a new budget plan. But because we're trillions of dollars in deficit, the budget plans are just kind of a lie anyway, because that's like coming up with a budget when you have negative $20,000. My daily budget when I have negative $20,000, if I'm going to spend like 40 or 60, it's not really that big a deal. We're kind of just pushing semantics. We don't really have a plan. We don't stick by our budgets anyway. So that's all. It's ridiculous. But this is basically Zika, and what is going on right now is a microcosm of what's going on in our government. And by that, I mean President Obama has requested $2 billion of funding to fight the Zika virus. The House, which is all pretty heavily Republican conservative House, very fiscally conservative, upset that the budget cannot be balanced, upset that there's negative money, everywhere in the government, has decided to offer $622 million, which is a little more than a quarter of what President Obama was asking, knowing full well that he can veto a bill if it gets to his desk anyway. And then the Senate voted on its own bill before taking up the House's bill. And the Senate, which has been slightly, there's more Democrats in the Senate than the House, and it's this session at least been less fiscally conservative. They approved a $1.2 billion Zika budget to fight the disease. But this is what we have. That's almost double, but still barely more than half of what President Obama wants. So the Senate's bill is going to go to the House. They're not going to approve it because they say it's going to be too much money. The House's bill is going to go to the Senate. They're not going to approve it because they say it's too little money. And then either way, neither bill would be enough to make President Obama sign it anyway, and we really haven't done anything for Zika. Now, that is what's going on constantly with our government, is basically they're at war with each other because they're not really willing to compromise. And there's two things I found in covering the media that help politicians compromise. One is re-election, where basically everyone said that ran as a Republican in the last midterm election said they were going to stand up to Obamacare and they were going to fight against the current budget. And then they all got reelected, and most of them folded because it was easier for them to fold. And then that's why we saw people like John Boehner step down from their positions, because everyone was mad that they had this platform and didn't hold up to it. But during reelection years, people will stand up. And we are coming up on January where more people are getting elected besides just the president. So everyone is standing up for things and being stubborn, and not that much has happened. But something that does make people in Congress work is a vacation. And that's right, Congress, much like a small child in elementary school, decides to have a 3-month break in the middle of the summer, or like 2.5 months. And I have no idea why. They just get this huge break. It's basically the best job in the world. You get every holiday off. They take weeks off at a time when they're approaching a holiday. They always seem to go back to their states whenever they want to, but don't really know what they're doing there. You don't really have to show up for work all that much in the Senate as long as you show up enough to get revoted, and then you get summers off basically whenever you want. And if you've the most recent congressional and senatorial members, you don't even really have to be very productive because they aren't really doing anything, at least according to every single other Congress in history. So the one thing that does make them pass things is when they have an ultimatum before vacation. Because as much as they want to stand up for their platform, when they have a family vacation booked to a tropical destination, or little Cindy has a soccer game and a dance recital they can't miss, everyone all of a sudden ends up compromising on stuff. And that's what we're approaching. Once we get into June, people don't want to extend their work hours into their vacation. So let's say everyone's supposed to leave on June 10th and it's June 8th. All of a sudden people start compromising because, hey, we're all friends. We all golf at the same country club. We all live in the same neighborhoods, in the same gated apartment communities. Maybe we should just be friends and all let each other go on vacation. Oh, and by the way, let's vote for a raise for ourselves. That's what happens. So we're in this beautiful spot with Zika where everyone's pretending to stand up for what they believe in. Nothing's actually getting done. No compromise is going to happen. And then right before they go on vacation, narrowly before the Olympics, will have passed this big Zika legislation to make it look all good, when in reality, they probably could have come to the compromise months earlier. It's ridiculous. So I'm still honestly very worried. Harvard scientists have backed me up. This could be a problem. The Olympics could be a very big problem this year. If I was a journalist and my company wanted to send me there for 2 weeks, I'd be really concerned about going. The Brazilian economy is in a terrible place. They had problems with the World Cup, with structures breaking and getting destroyed. The water there is horribly unclean, and then you have a mosquito-borne illness. It's just not a good I'd have to really think about it. I have to figure out what assurances there were, and I'd have to do some research. I'm sure eventually I would go, but I'd be going with that super intense bug spray that kills every living thing in sight, which is not what I want to be putting on my body, but you got to do what you got to do, I guess. So that's where we're at with Zika. Something else came up that I've been talking about. You guys have heard me talk about driverless cars a lot. Well, I didn't even think about this, but it turns out a startup is testing and has tested self-driving big rigs to use on highways. 18-wheeling trucks with 80,000 pounds of cargo, according to the AP, that are driven by a robot. A trucker is in the car, but he only needs to be behind the wheel when it's not on the highway. Think about how much that could change the way shipping works, because right now you always see those trucks pulled over on the side of the road because the way the unions work, drivers have to sleep every now and then. Totally makes sense. Well, now a driver can sleep while the car is going on the highway and then can drive, at certain intersections and when they're in and out of the city, and you've expedited the entire freight process. It could be absolutely revolutionary, but again, like the impact with a Lyft driver, which we talked about, you could see a lot of people out of work. I never really thought about it for the transportation of, supplies, how it would affect industry, how it would affect distribution. But clearly it would have a huge impact. The company, which was started by people who used to work with Google's driverless cars division, like we talked about, maybe got fired, maybe got removed from there, jumped into another startup, got some processes going with them, doing really well. Who knows if Google will buy them back, and next thing you know, all the same employees are back at the same company again. So everything I've been talking about seems to be barreling into one today. But driverless trucks in another incredible way. I don't know if incredible is the word, and that's a word I use too much. I'm thinking about it, people. I'm trying to stop. All right? I'm trying to improve. I have to listen to me too. I think it could be a revolutionary system. I'm still thinking the insurance companies are going to be disappointed because, 18-wheelers getting wrecks too, and that's how they make money. So taking the tired drivers off the road who, after long shifts, could be at risk, that can't be good if you run an insurance company. So that's the end of part 1 today here at The Deuce. And now let's get into part 2. So for part 2 on The Deuce, we talked a little bit about the frustrations I have with government, but here's something interesting. That's really more about how government did the right thing, and maybe systematically we're not helping it at all. Just over 60 years ago, yesterday actually, the 17th, was the resolution to the famous case Brown versus the Board of Education, which of course said separate but not equal. So there is no separate but equal, and desegregated schools. So huge evolutionary step to culture within the United States, and a huge progress marker and a benchmarker that we all look at as a way of our society moving forward in terms of how we view race. Well, turns out that not every society is moving forward, and that's because just on the 16th of this year, so more than 60 years later, a judge had to order a town in Mississippi, Cleveland, Mississippi, to desegregate its schools. Basically, it had 2 junior high schools and 2 high schools, and a ton of black students were going to one, and a ton of white students were going to the other, and they were largely separated. And from what everyone understands, there was a huge stigma if you were the white student going to the black school and the black student going to the white school. So there's 2 types of segregation. You have de jure and de facto. So de jure segregation, like of the jury, would be court-ordered segregation or legal segregation. That's the old school, like, whites-only fountain. Then you have de facto segregation. De facto segregation still exists. De facto segregation is what I saw when I went to the University of South Carolina, and I would be in the cafeteria on Chicken Finger Wednesdays, which was a huge deal, and there would be one line that was 90% black people and another line that was 90% white people. It wasn't this line is for white people, this line is for black people. It was tons of people would get into one line of one race, and tons of people of another line would get into another race would get into another line, because that was the way the culture had sort of taught them how to do it, and the way that it had just been done for so long. And a lot of white people had other white friends, and black people had other black friends, and the lines just formed that way, and no one said anything about it. And there were very few people who sort of did the smart thing and just got in the shorter line so they could get the chicken fingers faster. That would be an example of de facto segregation. It's sort of just happening because culture lets it happen. And that is what is happening in Cleveland, Mississippi. And that is why a judge is basically telling them that this was desegregating their schools for the first time in their 100-year history, because they never really desegregated them. They just basically pretended. He said that they were running two identical systems that were not identically equal. There's only 12,000 people there, and it's along the Mississippi River, but it's just an idea that maybe the government did something right, but there's times we can take into our own hands. How can you fight Zika even if the government won't give you money? Well, try not to go to Brazil. Don't expose yourself in ways that you can be effective. Be a little bit smarter, be knowledgeable about, if you're traveling and if you're going to a certain area, what maybe the symptoms are. Go to the doctor when you feel like maybe there's something wrong so you can get early diagnosis. All that stuff is what you can do, because maybe you can't look at somebody else. But the other thing is, it seems like every couple years we talk about a prom that's desegregated for the first time ever. It was only a couple years ago I did a story about that on the news. De jure and de facto, we shouldn't always be looking for the government to make the answer for us. Sometimes we can do it for ourselves. And the thing is, racism, segregation, those things are taught. And because when you talk to a little kid and you talk to a little white kid and they're saying, hey, I have a friend at school, his name's Timmy, and you ask what Timmy's like, and they'll tell you he's funny or he's tall or he does this or he's goofy or he has this color shoes or this color backpack. And next thing you know, you see Timmy, and Timmy might be an Asian kid. And you'd have no idea, because that's not really what a small child is looking for when they describe their friends. They're only learning that because that's how you might describe, as, an older person might describe your friends to someone else. And people are always listening. Kids, adults, everyone is always listening, and they're always impressionable. That's something I learned in my first job when I was coaching a swim team and building a swim program. The kids that I was coaching were always very impressionable, and I always had to be intelligent about leading with my actions and representing myself in the right way. But my boss had these great words of wisdom, because what intimidated me was the parents of the kids that I was coaching. And she said, you need to teach people how to treat you. If you go in and you let the parents sort of push you around and you don't seem to have the confidence and you don't seem to have their kids' best interest at heart, then they'll take cues on that. But if you teach them that you know what you're doing, that you're investing your time and energy in these kids, and you have these kids' best interests at heart, and you've shown that to the kids, the parents will follow, because you can teach them how to treat you. You can train people what's acceptable. And I think that goes even for something like these desegregating of a school in Mississippi that, didn't follow instructions for so long, is that you can choose the way you act in a certain situation, or you allow other people to act. And you can choose the way that you have your social interactions, and you can choose the way you teach impressionable children. So maybe that's the message we leave with today. It's not just about what the government isn't doing or why something is the way it is, whether it's transgendered bathroom laws or all these social causes that are up in arms. What you want or what you don't want. You have the ability to make your own choice and to teach other people around you and make your own difference. So maybe we start thinking about how we can change our de facto instead of complaining that no one is changing our de jure for us. That's how we're ending this Thursday. I'm Davis Spindle. I've got a lot of things in the works. A lot of people reaching out to me about this podcast. I think the next couple weeks are going to be some really exciting stuff. So with that, I leave you. Have a great week. Oof, I just burped. Wow. Indigestion up the yin yang. With that, I leave you. Have a great Thursday. Hashtagtrending.com for all the other podcasts. Check it out. Later. Deuces.